Welcome to the Practice Discipleship Training Initiative. My name is Dawn Troutman. I am from LutheranLifeCoach.com, and I am coming you today from the New York Metro Synod. This initiative is a dynamic partnership between the ELCA Youth Ministry Network, the ELCA and its youth gathering, the seminaries and colleges, and resource providers for children, youth, and family ministries in the church. The goal of Practice Discipleship is to foster faithful, thoughtful, and intentional leaders in congregations who follow Jesus in their daily lives. The theme for this year is Faith Formation in a Missional Age. As you can see, there are a series of 7 webinars that focus on Lutheran theology, ministry theory, and practical skills relating to our theme. Today's webinar is Walking Together in Solidarity, a Theology of Accompaniment. I love the title. There's a lot there. Our presenter is Rozella White, and she has served as the Minister for Youth and Families and Congregations in Texas, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. For 5 years, she was the Ministry Coordinator for Youth and Family Ministry in the Texas-Louisiana Gulf Coast Synod and has worked with a contract employee with the ELCA researching best practices in the area of short-term mission and global engagement. Rozella was recently named the Program Director for Young Adult Ministry for the ELCA, and she will begin her work in Chicago next month. Rozella's goal is to help others become aware of who God has created them to be and grow in their love, understanding, and compassion of self in order to be in authentic relationship with others and use their gifts to transform the world. In her spare time, Rozella blogs about her experiences with depression as a young Black woman of faith at embracingmyshadow.com with the hopes of encouraging others to embrace their whole selves. So before I turn it over to Rozella, I just wanted you to take note of the box on the right side of your screen. That is where you can type in questions or comments or ask for clarifications. I will keep an eye on that as we're talking, and I will relay your questions to Rozella. So thank you for being here live, and please do interact. We want your questions, no matter where they fall on the spectrum. We do want to hear from you. So with that said, let's welcome Rozella. Thank you for being here, Rozella.
Thank you, Don. Thank you so much. And I am excited to be sharing this time with everyone. As Don had mentioned, this Walking Together in Solidarity, a Theology of Accompaniment, that's a big title. There's a lot that goes with that. And so my goal for our time together is to actually break that down a little bit and hopefully take away some of the overwhelming feelings that come when we start talking about theology and accompaniment and solidarity. So just to begin, as Don mentioned, I have done work in the area of global mission and short-term mission, and a lot of that work looked at the ELCA's understanding of mission in the 21st century, and that is entitled A Theology of Accompaniment. As the Practice Discipleship Initiative was coming together, one of the things that I was asked as someone who's had a foot in both worlds of global mission and engagement and youth and family ministry was putting that together, like bringing this way of thinking theologically into how we understand faith formation in the 21st century. So just as a clarification point, because some people may be wondering, why are we talking about this as it pertains to faith formation? It really is important to think about a theology of accompaniment in our work because it provides those of us who work with young people and families a framework, so to speak, for understanding how we are called to love God, love self, and love others for the purpose of being in relationships that are authentic, meaningful, just, and transformative. So this is really a way of being that not only we embody as agents of faith formation, but that we can help our young people and families grow into and live out in their everyday lives 24/7. So I really love how these two things marry. So the questions that we look at when we talk about a theology of accompaniment and faith formation in the missional age, there are 4 questions. Actually, next slide, please. The 4 questions are as follows. So, and this is what the presentation actually deals with. What is the theological underpinning that grounds our mission and faith formation, right? We begin with first thinking about how it is we understand what it is that we're called to do from a theological standpoint. And just to break it down even further, I just, again, want to lift up that theology is essentially defined as the study of God. So we are looking at who God is, how we understand God to be, and how that's related to our mission and faith formation. The second question is, what is a theology of accompaniment, and why is it important for faith formation to incorporate this theological understanding? That's just taking it a bit further as we break down what actually a theology of accompaniment is, looks like, sounds like, for the purpose of how it's translated. And then why is it important in the work that we do to incorporate this way of being? The third question that I will be addressing is, what skills help us cultivate a theology of accompaniment with young people and families? And in this session, we'll be looking at some actual skills, some ways of being that this way of thinking helps us cultivate as we are in relationship with others. And then the last part is in many ways trying to make this all practical, right? So I don't want you all to begin in your ministry settings with talking about a theology of accompaniment and using that language, but I want to give you the background information and then help you translate that to your young people. And the way that that is done is I've kind of put together 4 ways of being in relationship that we can help cultivate and also encourage in our young people that help them live this out. So as we begin, I really do want this to be as dynamic and relational as possible. For those of you all that might have seen me present this information in person, you know that I like feedback and I like to have your questions as we're having the conversation. So before we actually begin some of the teaching part of this, I'd really like for you to think about accompaniment, right? This notion of walking alongside someone and joining with him or her in action. And I want you to think about who has accompanied you on your journey as you think about faith formation. Who has accompanied you, and what are those positive and negative ways that you've seen that? Because we know that everyone doesn't necessarily accompany us in the most positive ways, but there's definitely something that we can learn from them. And I think I'd like to hear your feedback or see your feedback as it's typed or given as you provide that. What characteristics did you notice in these people? Like, what were those characteristics that they embodied, whether it be a positive accompanying experience or a negative one? What were those characteristics that you saw?
Wonderful. So please do type in the box and I will relay your answers, and I'll give you an answer while we wait for everyone else who's thinking about it. There's the obvious, parental people, and I hope some people actually do write that into the box. I'm going to talk about my confirmation mentor, who I went away to college long ago at a time before I had a cell phone, and she knew that first night when my parents dropped me off, I'd be all alone, and she thought to call me in the dorm so that I would have a connection to somebody I knew my first night away from home.
So would you describe that just as being thoughtful? Is that the characteristic, or what are the actual? Yeah.
Thoughtful and still connected, like it wasn't something, she was following me through into another young adult phase and not sort of ending her relationship just because I was confirmed and graduated from high school. So Chris wrote authentic and not afraid to be a real person and not just our pastor, and Terry wrote good listener, encouraging, honest, and able to ask tough questions. Thank you to both of you, and please do keep typing in.
Yes, please do. And I think that's important as we think about, again, not only what does it mean to cultivate a theology of accompaniment, but as we think about and reflect on our own lives. A big part of the work that I do in my own passion is helping people just reflect on their journeys and understand and just come to a fuller awareness of how they got where they are, right? Who are those people, those things, those experiences that impacted them along the journey? So even asking yourself, what were those people, who were those people, and what were those things that helped you become the person that you are? And you'll see that there are tie-ins to the skills that have actually been lifted up that a theology of accompaniment cultivates. There is definitely a connection between our own personal experiences and then those experiences that we are hoping our young people to have as they grow in their faith.
Wonderful. And Karen wrote her parents who led her by example, her best friend. Someone else wrote the bishop because he's so inspiring. I love that. And Erica wrote compassion, gentleness, honesty, and open-mindedness. Thank you all for your answers.
Those are great. Those are really great. And I'm not even just going to assume, but I know that, excuse me, many of you embody those characteristics in your settings with the people that you have been called to work for and serve with. This is not, again, something that has to be done from a top down because I work with you, then these are the things that I have. But this is something that we talk about in our relationships with our families, with our loved ones, with our friends. So this is why I feel like this is such an important piece of this practice discipleship conversation because it's about how we relate to one another.
Wonderful, and you're getting lots of great answers here. Karen wrote, I forgot the most important, God. So thank you, Karen. And Tara wrote, be there even when you don't have answers. And Charles wrote, my campus pastor was curious and enthusiastic about the faith adventure. What a great term.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Curious and enthusiastic. I love it.
Yes, and a faith adventure. That's a great phrase for campus ministry.
Oh, yeah. Well, as we move forward in this conversation, I want you to keep these people and these characteristics in your mind as we have these conversations. And I want to kind of shift our focus to grounding our theology. So as Lutherans, we talk a lot about being theologians or subscribing to a theology of the cross. Again, theology being how we understand God. Actually, you can go back one slide. I'm sorry. A theology being how we understand God, and then this understanding that we understand God to meet us in times of suffering and pain. And this to me comes to life in ways that I didn't imagine it once I read Andrew Root in his book, Revisiting Relational Youth Ministry. So he says, and I quote, the incarnation has made these very children our responsibility, our beloved brothers and sisters. We must reach out to their humanity, even if it means the suffering of our own humanity. For this is the way of the cross. It may be that the reason they don't trust our offers of friendship is that they intuitively know that we are not willing to see, hear, and accompany them in their deepest suffering. We have offered them trips to Disneyland, silly games, and cool youth rooms, not companionship in their darkest nights and their scariest hells. This quote, or this, when I read this, for me, this way of thinking about a theology of a cross and being in relationship with others, with the young people and young adults that we are called to work with, literally came to life. I saw and understood and felt in a different way this ancient theological understanding that we as Lutherans have subscribed to. And I'm just curious, as you think about this and as you think about our own grounding in theology, kind of what are your thoughts about this quote? And then we have some questions that I'd really like to get your feedback on. And it doesn't matter which order, but to think about how has God been incarnate in your life? And how have you been an incarnational presence, and how has someone been this for you? And what are the struggles that present themselves when we engage in this way? Because truth be told, this is a much more vulnerable, risky, profound way to be engaged with the young people, families, and young adults that we're called to work with. And there are struggles that come with that. And then what are implications of using a theology of incarnation in our setting? So you don't have to answer all of these questions, but I really would like you to be thinking about this notion of being incarnate, of being people who understand a theology that is grounded in who God is, who Jesus is, and how God made himself known through the person of Jesus Christ on the cross. So if there are any responses, questions, comments about that, I'd love to hear them.
Wonderful. So tell me more specifically what question they're answering.
They could answer any of those four that are up there on the screen.
Wonderful. So we'll have a little delay. Do you have an answer for one of them?
Yeah. When
Turn it back to you.
yeah, I can do that. So I think about God being present in my life, and for me, this has become most pronounced recently with my struggle with depression and the acceptance of the fact that I've struggled with depression for over 10 years. And so seeing people in my life who have been the very presence of God during those times of suffering and have walked alongside me when they didn't know what the hell to say or what the hell to do or, you know, what this was that was going on, but me actually becoming vulnerable and allowing them to walk alongside me, because I think a big part of this accompaniment and even God's incarnational presence is us taking a step back and allowing God to walk with us. I believe God is always with us and walking with us, but I believe something happens when we let go of some of our guards and we become vulnerable and actually give ourselves over to this. So the incarnation has been extremely a present theme in my life recently because I've seen it lived out through my loved ones and friends and even some of the young people I've worked with that have experienced similar things, or I know that they have some mental health challenges and they're choosing to be vulnerable in relationship with me. So that's been amazing.
Wow. So Tara wrote, struggles when we engage this way, getting the church to see ministry outside the church box. Fascinating.
That's a good one, right? Because this is not something that we can quantify and qualify. This is not being in these types of relationship, right, is not going to necessarily translate into how many people showed up at whatever event on whatever day. This is a relational soul work type of being. And so I join you in that, Tara, in the struggles of what does it mean as we show this and live this way out? What does it mean for those that we work with and the congregations and settings that we work in? And quite honestly, it provides us a point of education, to provide some education about what it is we actually do, in addition to the things that they see, but being in relationship with young people and families in this deeper, more profound way.
And helping others to see that they have the opportunity to do that too.
Yes.
It's not just the designated person at the church.
Absolutely. And I think that becomes one of the core points of our jobs, right? It's not just about what I do and who I connect with, but who are we empowering to do this, and how are we inviting others into this journey as they walk alongside our young people too? Because the reality is I'm not going to connect with everyone in this way. You know, there are people that you have a deeper connection with. There are people that you connect in different ways with, and there's some people, quite frankly, that you just don't like and that don't like you. And that is a reality of being in relationships with a variety of people. But the I think creative part of our work is that we're able to call others into these roles and then provide a richer, fuller experience for our young people. So they may not be talking to me, but I know that they're going to be in relationship with someone who understands and gets this way of thinking and being in relationship.
Wonderful. Karen wrote, one of the most common questions I'm asked is, where is God, or why doesn't God do something in the midst of tragedy? A pastor once told me when I asked the same question that God cries right alongside us when things happen. He doesn't stop things from happening, but rather promises to always be right there with us when it does. Often this is in the actions of people. Thank you, Karen.
Yes, that's a very good point, particularly when we know that so many of both adults and young people in our churches kind of understand God as this being that either makes things happen or doesn't make things happen, right? So when bad things happen, how do we understand that? And I think, again, this way of thinking about God as, you know, this being that meets us on the cross in our time of suffering is huge. But I also think it pushes us to push our young people and families, obviously not in the time of crisis, but as before times of crisis or after times of crisis, when we're able to have teaching moments, to think about this more broadly. Because I think that question, and I'm one that has struggled with this question, we call it theodicy in our seminarian circles, right? The question of why do bad things happen and why does God allow suffering to occur? It seems like it's easy for us to ask that question to ourselves, and we get caught in a vacuum, right? So do we ask that question every day? You know, why are bad things happening in the world, and why are there X number of billions of people who are living in poverty? And is God allowing that to happen, or is that something that we're all complicit in? So I think sometimes in our times of suffering, let me back up. I think part of our role also as agents of faith formation is to help young people come to a broader view of who God is, how God is active, and to honestly recognize that it's not just about you in that moment, right? That there are so many other things that happen in this world, but the thing that we cling to and that we hold on to in the midst of all of that is that God has promised to never leave nor forsake us, and God is with us in the midst of. And again, who are those people? What are those experiences? What are those things that happen that you can point to that help you get through it?
Wonderful. And Karen has a follow-up. She's the one you were just responding to, and then I have comments from two other people. So Karen wrote she agrees she felt his presence strongly through her encounter with cancer and how her illness and God's response has helped others around her. Thank you, Karen.
Wow, thank you, Karen.
And then Erica wrote, implications, God is with us everywhere, at every time, offers me the greatest comfort. It is the truth that we are welcomed in God's presence just as we are. This understanding of God resonates powerfully with our youth. And then Terry also wrote, one of the most common questions she asked is where or God. Oh, we had this before. I'm sorry. Some of them are posting twice, and I apologize. So I think we're caught up for now.
Okay. All right.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tara. Thank you for jumping in. I'm sorry, Rozella. Implications of a theology of incarnation is asking people to be uncomfortable, which might
Mm.
cause turmoil for those who want a comfortable faith. And who doesn't want to be comfortable? Oh, especially as Americans, Tara, we love comfort.
Oh,
Oh,
and our churches and I mean, that's a good one right there. So
yeah.
when you figure that out about how to help people be uncomfortable, then you can share that with all of us, because
Yes.
I think you're absolutely right, right? So the implication is that people are going to be uncomfortable, but we know, and I'd like to assume that those on this call understand that this whole journey, this Christ walk, this work that we do, this way that we're called to be disciples, least and foremost, or at least is least about, us being comfortable, right? This is not about a journey of comfortability. If so, I think you chose the wrong journey when we subscribe to a faith that says, pick up your cross and follow me, and we believe in a God that became human and suffered on the cross and died. This is not about comfortability. This is about authenticity. This is about a sacrifice, and this is about a love in relationship that really benefits all. And so I think it gives us a unique challenge, and I think this is also why it's important to surround ourselves with people who both get this and can help us share this way of thinking in the context that we find ourselves in.
Yes. Thank you. So let's move on, and I'll jump in when we have a few more responses.
It sounds good. So as we think about, again, the grounding of our theology and defining this theology, a story that we use to really look at this, it comes from the Gospel of Luke from chapter 24, verses 13 through 25. And this is commonly referred to on the road to Emmaus. And from the gospel and the stories of our faith, we understand that God's mission is reconciliation. We and all people are broken before God. We are turned in on ourselves, away from God and others. We sow discord and dissension. We hurt one another and abuse the earth that we have been given to care for. We are alienated far from God and from one another. And Jesus came to reconcile us with God. Again, God meets us in our brokenness and restores our relationships with God and with one another. God desires our reconciliation to one another so that we no longer exploit or hurt, and our reconciliation with the earth so that we no longer abuse or waste. We continue to be imperfect, but we are constantly called back to God's mission of reconciliation. And I feel like this mission of reconciliation is so beautifully described, quite frankly, in this story in the Gospel of Luke. And so I'm going to read a part of the story, and then I have some things to just share with you about it as we move forward. Go ahead, Dawn.
No, I was just saying, great. Bring in some scripture.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, ground ourselves in that which we hold dear to. So Luke 24, verse 13. Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" Jesus asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the 3rd day since all of this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but they didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." Then Jesus said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if they were going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord is risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. So this text is one that we use, and I say we, the ELCA Global Mission. This is a foundational text as we think about what does it mean to be an accompanying relationship. And one of the things that I've said, and I've said this when I've done this presentation in person, is that I would, and this is I'm confessing to you, so please take it with a grain of salt, but I would read scripture, right, and I would read this story, and stories like this, and I would be Jesus in the story. I don't know if that was my ego, if that was my misguided sense of understanding, but it would be these people that didn't know what they were doing walking, and I'm the one that comes to them and gives them the true way of thinking and being and believing. And really it's quite simple because I'm not Jesus. I really actually don't have any desire to be Jesus. But, you know, why is it that I would read scripture and encounter scripture with this view, with this lens? Not that I was the person on the road with the other person and Jesus appeared to us both, but that I was Jesus. So it makes me wonder, have any of you had an experience where as you think about what does it mean to accompany each other, as you think about your own relationship with scripture, how you see yourself in these types of stories, or even in this story? How have you seen yourself as you think about what does it mean to be in relationship and how God is in that relationship? Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah, I love that question because we do focus a lot on be like Jesus, which is a great, you know, frame of mind, but in the story, we often can learn more from not seeing ourselves in that role in the story.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you. So please do write in when you have an example.
And maybe that's a little too much to ask. You know, maybe you're putting yourself out there, so maybe Dawn can, like, anonymously give the response.
Don't give your name. Yeah, so that it's not on the recording. Yeah, no name. I love that. I'll give you one example. I gave this example last time, so if somebody's listening to all the recordings in a row, it's going to sound redundant. But where I attend in New York City, the pastor got to the prodigal son and got up in front of a huge congregation of transplanted young professionals in New York City and said, "You are the brother that ran away to the city." Everybody was like, wow, you know, but he nailed it and brought it back around to the gospel, you know, but amazing, you know, because it was one of those moments you're like, I've never been in that role in that story. Wow.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Well, and it's interesting that you say that because I too have had that experience, like I said, not even reading these stories, but in, you know, reading Old Testament or, you know, anything from the Hebrew Scriptures, and when I look at it, I'm judging the people of Israel, right? I'm judging how they complained. I'm judging how they traveled and how they weren't trusting. And the reality is I have the whole story, or at least the story as it's been told to this point. They were living in the moment. And I think that it became very clear to me the first time that I went to Egypt and was in the desert and was like, this is a lot of sand. And I can see why they would be complaining. And I'm only here for like 3 days, and they were there, you know. So perspective, I think, is important as we.
Right. Hindsight is 20/20. Everyone loves to judge.
Yes. And again, this text, as we think about how accompaniment is revealed here, it's about two people walking together, having experienced something, and God showing up on the road to them together, right? This is not someone that has the knowledge firsthand. This is not someone that's teaching someone else. This is really about God being with them on the journey. And the next slide. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm loving that they are accompanying one another and experiencing God at the same time. It's not like, I know everything and I'm going to tell you. about it.
Absolutely.
Terry
Absolutely.
just wrote, she loves this story because it speaks so loudly to her. She sees herself as one of the disciples, clueless and unable to see God's presence at first. So many times she's questioned where God is, but when she takes the time to open her heart and really see, she realizes God was right there the whole time and she missed it. That is great insight. Thank you.
Yes. God was right there again, this understanding that God is consistently present with us, but how often are we able to see that or experience that or feel that? And quite honestly, what gets in the way of us doing that,
Right.
That's
Right.
good.
So let's go ahead and I'll jump in when there are more responses.
Absolutely. So on the next slide, you're going to see kind of a visual representation of what happens when we shift from one way of being, when we think about mission and being in relationship, to another, to this way of being in accompaniment. So this top image, right, you see the two circles, my story, God's story, with the line in your story. For a long time, this was the way that we understood mission. This was the way that we understood being engaged with quote-unquote the other, right? I have a story, and my story is fully encapsulated unto itself, and God has a story, and ultimately God's on my side, right? And the goal of us being in relationship and the goal of me coming to you is to get you and your story on my side of the line. But there's this dividing line. So this is not the imagery that the Road to Emmaus shows us. This is kind of how we have historically understood, again, being in mission, being in relationship. And I could even say, even in youth ministry historically, you could put adults where it says my story and the church where it says God's story, the line, and then you can have youth, children, young adults, whomever on the other side, right? We set up these dividing walls, and we believe that we're on the right side, whatever that right side might be. The bottom picture shows kind of what it looks like when we talk about a theology of accompaniment in visual form. First of all, we notice that God's story encapsulates everything, right? There is nowhere that God isn't, and we are in the midst of that story. So I still have my story, and you still have your story, but we see that they overlap and that they're connected, and that there's a point and an intersection that we can say from a Christian standpoint that is where Christ is present, where that overlapping occurs. But the reality is that our stories are not separate, that God holds all the stories, and that the beauty of this is that not only are we on equal playing field, but your story is just as valid as my story. And together we make up and are a part of God's story. And so I kind of love this. It's such a simple drawing, but this visual representation of what does it mean to move from one way of thinking about being in mission, being in relationship, even being in the church, to another way of thinking about that. Does anyone have any thoughts about this?
Yes, this is a little carryover from the last one, but relates completely to this slide as well. Erica wrote she often finds herself identifying as the doer of the gospel instead of allowing the living word to change her heart. Thank you. And Charles wrote sometimes he sees himself as the bread in Jesus' hands, broken and shared to establish community. Thank you, Charles.
Oh, I love those imageries. And I think Erica, when she talked about being the doer, I mean, I resonate with that, right? But then I go back to, I'm sure someone famous said this, but I heard this from someone else. You know how we hear things and they get passed down. But, right, we're human beings, not human doings. Yeah. And so as I think about, because I am so, not just guilty of that, but that is so much a part of who I am, and I'm learning to embrace it, but also to challenge it with this notion of being a doer. And what does it mean to just be? And that is true for the work that I do, for how I engage Scripture, for the relationships that I'm in. I think there's so much richness in being that we miss because we're so busy doing.
Right. Thank you. So let's keep going, and please do continue to share your comments as we go.
So as we take, kind of defining a theology of accompaniment and grounding our understanding in Scripture, this moves us to a place where we talk about cultivating those things that we cultivate and model, these skills that we cultivate and model that portray a theology of accompaniment. Or you could also say that these become that which you measure what you're doing, the ministry that you're engaged in, the relationship that you're engaged in. This is how you measure if you're doing a theology of accompaniment. And these are actually adapted. This part of the presentation is taken from the accompaniment section in the Global Mission Gathering resource finder. And so the Global Mission Unit of the ELCA has a series of events around the country. So congregations and synods can invite Global Mission to come to their location, and they lead what they call local mission gatherings. And that's where global and local meet, and where people have the opportunity to learn more about a theology of accompaniment as it pertains to mission. And then they take that and then utilize that in their context. So again, a lot of my work before was in that vein. Again, understanding a theology of accompaniment from a missional engagement point of view. But I think this is really interesting to think about how we practice this in faith formation and what does that look like in our relationships. So there are 5 skills that we talk about cultivating as we employ or use a theology or practice a theology of accompaniment. The first is mutuality. So this refers to how people engage in relationship with one another. Reciprocity, trust, and recognition of gifts within each other, and recognition of the gifts within each other are key, right? So this is really how we understand that we are in equal relationship with one another, and that this is a relationship defined by sharing, not by one giving so that the other receives, but that it's mutual. There's a reciprocity that happens. The second is inclusivity. So this refers to our ability to see who is and who is not included in our efforts and in our ministry. We are called to be hospitable and to be honest about our assumptions and walls. And again, if we think about the image that we saw before when we talked about the old way of doing mission or being in relationship, right, there was very clearly a wall. And I think it would be naive of us to say that that wall just disappears because we draw the picture differently, right? I think the important thing is for us to be honest about what are those walls that we have within ourselves or that we as a community or ministry have put up that excludes people. And so, again, inclusivity is a key skill that we practice when we're living out a theology of accompaniment. The third is vulnerability. And I think that sometimes this one is difficult in our setting of being people from North America, from the United States, because being vulnerable is often equated with being weak. But this actually refers to our ability to be authentic and honest about our thoughts and feelings. We give up power and are open to new relationships and experiences. Vulnerability for me has been probably the single most powerful of these skills in my personal life and in my professional life. And I think that many of us, when we've had experiences where we've taken the risk or the chance to be vulnerable in relationship, whether it be with youth and their families, whether it be with our colleagues, whether it be in our own families and our own relationships, that we see how God uses that, right? We see how things come about, and I can only think about my own journey and my storytelling with depression. Like, by doing that, people are also able to share their stories, and then we create this space where all are welcome and where we understand that we are called to be authentic and honest about our thoughts and feelings. The fourth skill is empowerment. This refers to our ability to let go of power and support others as they claim their power. So what does this look like in the context of our, of our ministry? And I'll just say, if I'm thinking about, the youth ministry that I served and was a part of most recently, empowerment means that I'm not the only person doing the work, right? That I am a big part of my job is connecting with others, is understanding and helping them understand and recognize their gifts, and providing a safe space for them to try and to lead and to do things in a supported way that they are then able to understand that God is calling them and uses them just like God uses me, right? So they're a big piece of what does it mean to practice the theology of accompaniment comes down to how we empower each other. And then the last is sustainability. So this refers to the reality that relationships take work. And I think if we're being honest, we know that, whether it be marriage, whether it be partnership, whether it be a work relationship, friendships, relationships take work and they take time. And so without dedicating the time, care, and compassion necessary to nurture a relationship, we know it will die. So as we practice the theology of accompaniment, we understand that doing this in the context of our congregations takes time. And anyone that works with young people knows that relationships don't just happen overnight, right? We know that you have to cultivate trust, that you have to be present, that you have to be authentic, and then you see how relationships grow from that. So the thing that I love about each of these is that I really do believe that they can be translated into our context and into our ministries as we think about what does it mean to be in relationship, what does it mean to lead, what does it mean to be agents of faith formation in the 21st century. Are there any thoughts that you have about these skills, or if there are any skills that you would be more comfortable with or less comfortable with as you first look at this?
I love it. And as people write that in, I just want to share one comment from the previous slide, just as a reminder. That's the one where there's your story and God's story on one side of a line. And thank you, magic person behind the scenes. Going back to the slide, Tara wrote, this paradigm reminds her of the God, people, land paradigm and how we have traditionally interpreted it.
Absolutely. So, right, so like, God has sent me to this place, and we want you to believe what we believe, and we have land, and then once you do that, then we take the land. Is that what you're talking about, Tara?
Yeah, confirm for us, Tara, because we want to go in the direction you're going. We just want to make sure we're understanding. So, and also write in which of these mutuality, inclusivity, vulnerability, empowerment, sustainability, which working well for you. From Don, he asks a question: how can one measure effectiveness on any of these things? How do we know if we're moving in that direction? Thank you, Don.
That's a really good question, and I don't necessarily, there isn't a rubric for that except for the ways in which I think your ministry looks, feels, and moves forward. And so that sounds really like philosophical or like, you know, nebulous as I say that. But when I think about each of these, and I should probably back up and say this, I am someone that is constantly evaluating. I am someone that's constantly asking questions about the work that I'm doing, about the relationships that I'm in. And so for me, a part of the, seeing how these are lived out happens on a regular basis through reflecting on the ministry that I'm a part of and those things that I've been called to lead, right? So for me, it's like, are we being inclusive? Are we in mutual relationship? And I think that a big way to test this out is once you have shared this and trained your leaders with this way of thinking, they too can be participants that are able to see when this is happening and when it's not happening, right? So are we empowering others to lead? If it's the same people doing the same thing for 5+ years, then I'm going to guess that maybe we're not empowering others to lead, right?
Right.
If and that's for me being honest. When we talk about vulnerability, you know, how are we ourselves taking the risk to be authentic and honest about our thoughts? How do we create that space for our young people? You know, when young people feel like they're able to share who they are and what they're thinking. And so, and maybe this is part of, you know, next stages as we continue on with this work is how do we measure this? Because a lot of this is just in my own practice and understanding. And so if you have other suggestions or thoughts or anything that you could offer, that would be great.
Wonderful. And yes, I'd love to know some more answers, and I'm sure Don would too. Erica wrote, inclusivity is the most difficult. It's constantly challenging to see how we are excluding and what we can do to welcome all to the table. Thank you, Erica. It's hard to see who's not there.
Yes, it is hard to see who's not there. And so part of the way that I deal with this one is, again, grounding ourselves in Scripture, right? So prayer and Scripture are huge parts of any ministry that I'm a part of because I'm a person of Christian faith, and B, I feel like God has spoken to us and speaks to us through those continually, right? So as we take the time to pray and to discern, I think that becomes the first step in moving forward in terms of seeing who is and who isn't present. Then I think about the needs and concerns of the context and community we find ourselves in, whether that be the church, whether that be the actual neighborhood, whether that be the specific ministry group that we're a part of. You know, what are those contexts? What is the context? What are the needs? And what's missing? And I think I said this when we were at Extravaganza. You know, I really do feel like we are called to be in many ways spiritual anthropologists who are agents of faith formation. So being in youth and family ministry, being in young adult ministry requires that we put on the hat of the sociologist, of the anthropologist, of the person that is doing the cultural excavating, because that is how we are able to, I think, make meaning in the 21st century. I don't know. For me, this is really important. And if I don't have the skills to do that, then I am looking for who around me has those skills. Because maybe you're not a sociologist. My background in sociology stuff, so I keep saying that. Maybe you're not a sociologist. Maybe you're not an anthropologist. Maybe you don't care to be, and that's not where your gifts lie. But I think to say that we're not paying attention to all of those would be silly at this day and age because of how the world is, of how our young people are, and how they're living out their faith or not living out their faith. So.
Wonderful. So I have a few comments. This is a great discussion. Tara just clarified for us. She was the person talking about God, people, land. She wrote, God, Israelites, and Holy Land has created so much turmoil. We could rethink that paradigm, much like you have drawn a new paradigm. Thank you, Tara. And then she went on to refer to this slide that we're currently on. These 5 skills make me think about our congregation as well. How does our ability to accompany affect our sustainability? And I am going to go ahead and share the other 2 comments, and you can decide where to respond, Rozella. Terry wrote, I struggle most with empowerment, letting go of control, as well as not feeling like I'm burdening someone else with tasks and responsibilities. And Charles wrote, asset-based rather than needs-based planning fits right in with the theology of accompaniment. So thank you all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Terry's comment actually makes me think about, and this is from my chaplaincy days, right? We can't burden anyone. Right? And in the context of the ministry that we do, like I'm not having the big conversation about service and mission and global engagement. I'm talking about in the context of ministry that we do, when we ask someone to do something, they have the power, authority, and voice to say no, right? So as we think about who we are and how we're in relationship, I think the bigger issue, and I say this with love and I say this because I am this person, right, is us giving up control. And quite honestly, me giving up control requires that I am much more ahead of the game, much more prepared, much more organized than I probably would naturally be under any given circumstances. So I think it's challenging for us because to be an authentic relationship means that we do have to give up not just some of the control, but that we have to say, you know what, God is up to something and you are gifted to do this and I am here to guide you and walk alongside you, but you can do this and I can support you as you do this. So I think it's a growing edge definitely for us. You don't have to read those other 2 comments again because I want to respond to them, but I can't remember exactly what they
No, it's fine, it's fine. And I know you have 2 more slides, so I want to make sure we have enough time for that too. There's a little more than 10 minutes left.
Yes.
So Tara wrote, how does our ability to accompany affect our sustainability? So I'll give you that and then I'll remind you of the other comment.
How does our ability to accompany affect our ability to practice sustainability?
Affect our sustainability. I don't know if she means the longevity of the ministry or sustainability as a general concept.
Well, I'll answer this, and Tara, if I'm on the wrong track, please clarify for us. But again, to me, this ties into empowerment, into how we understand, and I think the other question was about assets, right?
Yes.
So how we understand the assets that are present, both the people assets, the resources, all of that. Because sustainability does not necessarily look like me being in a place for a long period of time in this context. It looks like me helping to foster relationships that are able to in some way stand the test of time, but also provide a place and space for others to be in relationship, right? So I'm no longer in the congregation that I was in last year as a youth and family minister. But there were people that were invited in, families and adults and other leaders that were invited in to be a part of that ministry that are still engaged, that are still connected to young people. When we talk about mentoring programs, we talk about ways that we support our young people as they grow in leadership. You know, again, it can't be all tied to me, and it can't be all tied to an individual. It has to be a community effort. So when the community begins to understand sustainability, I think then we start to see some foundational and cultural shifts in our context, that it doesn't just happen overnight, that if we're going to do this, it's going to take, you know, 4 years of doing this with this group of people so that by the next time these kids come through, now there's this system that has been created that we see the sustainability of it. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah, and I'll let Tara write in if you need more clarification, please do ask. So, and you touched on, Charles, asset-based rather than needs-based planning fits right in with this theology of accompaniment.
Yes, yes, right. So thinking about what is it we have, what are the gifts, the people, the talents, all of that. Because I think sometimes we get so caught up in like the planning that we start planning stuff that we really don't even have the capacity to do, let alone, you know, like, let's be honest. Again, let's be honest and authentic about who we are and what we have and who's not present, and then to go from there as we are discerning and in prayer and conversation with who God has created us to be.
Wonderful.
And so the last,
Tara did, you were on the right track with Tara. She was referring to congregational sustainability, whether their numbers are dwindling or not. She was contemplating how their ability to accompany as a congregation might be reflected in the pews. Thank you, Tara.
Tara got some good points here.
We need to unmute Tara. Lots of people. There's really some more insightful people on this webinar, but even if you feel like your comment is not super insightful, we still want to hear from you, and there will still be a chance in these next 5 to 10 minutes. So take it away, Rozella.
Okay. Well, the last two slides deal directly with how do we relate this to the young people and families that we work with. And again, I have done this presentation with the goal, or with the framework that what we're doing is being agents of faith formation in a missional age, and part of that is equipping our young people and families to be disciples. And so for me, we talked about these kind of skills that undergird, what it is that we do as we're practicing a theology of accompaniment. The next two slides talk about 4 ways of being, right? 4 things that we could say define our relationships when we are actually in a relationship defined as a theology of accompaniment. And I think this is really helpful, not just for us, but this may be one of the markers that we were talking about earlier, like how do we test this out to see if this is working. But I have come to believe that if I can help my young people judge and be in relationship, judge their relationships and be in relationship in these 4 ways, then I think I'm doing my job. And I'm serious about that. So again, the first one for me is authentic relationships. So when we are in authentic relationships, we are aware of our thoughts and feelings and how they affect the other person. We reveal our true selves and speak with integrity, compassion, and honesty, right? So authenticity, and we know working with young people that this is huge, but we also know that many of them feel like they cannot be their authentic selves. So then how do I, as an agent of faith formation, help them understand that their authentic self is rooted in who God created them to be and who God is and in what gifts God has given them, and then that they engage in those relationships or engage in relationships authentically. Right? They should be able to be fully who they are at all times. And we know that this is a journey, and we know that many adults don't do this. But again, this is kind of my utopic vision of what does it mean to relate a theology of accompaniment. Secondly, these relationships are meaningful. So relationships that seek to carry the joys and burdens with each other, for me, are defined as meaningful relationships. These relationships push you to not only find meaning in your life, but share with each other in ways that are transparent and seek to build up and not tear down. I do a lot with girls and high school girls in ministry, or high school girls and whether it be girls ministry or just relationships by way of mentoring. And on any given day, it could be any type of relationship that we're talking about, and relationships change as quickly as the weather changes in some cases. But one of the things I consistently ask them as I think about what does it mean to be in a meaningful relationship is, how is this relationship giving you life? Is this relationship building you up? And part of it is getting them to critically think about the people and relationships in their lives, because we know what it looks like for a relationship to build up, and what does that mean and feel like. So again, it's getting them to think about that. The last 2 on the next slide are relationships are just, and again, it goes back to how do we use our power in relationships. Do we see people as whole beings formed by their personal, cultural, societal, economic, religious, and other narratives? Just relationships cause us to care for one another in ways that level the playing field and allow us to walk together instead of walk ahead or behind each other. And then the last one is transformative. So relationships are transformative when they consistently push you to be your best self. They challenge you and hold you accountable. They provide space for reflection and encourage creativity. So for these last 2, again, it goes to defining what does a relationship that is employing a theology of accompaniment look like, and what are these markers that we can be nurturing in our young people as they grow in who they are as people of faith, but more importantly, as they engage in the world and in relationship with each other. And so for me, that looks like relationships that are authentic, meaningful, just, and transformative.
I love it. So any closing thoughts from the crowd? Any closing thoughts from you, Rozella? We do have a minute or two, and then we'll do some final announcement things.
I'd love to hear if anyone has any thoughts. And I just, again, I want to say that this is a lot. I know an hour doesn't do this justice. We could do like a year-long course on this.
Let's do it.
It would be really cool to see like groups or congregations that are working this and seeing how to make it relevant and contextual. Because again, this starts out in one place and we want to really move it to the place of being practical.
Right, and how to do that is really the question. I love it. Well, right now there are no comments, but I do want to thank you, Rozella, for being here, and I'll do a little bit of the closing announcements and then pop back in case anyone is typing in right now. Is that okay? So don't leave us.
Okay.
So I'll just do some of these announcements and then I'll check back to the chat box. So if you are typing right now, please know you will get a shout out, even though the slides are moving away. So thank you. This quick reminders, this webinar, along with all the others in this series, is being recorded and archived at practicediscipleship.org. And please, please download it. Use it with other members of the congregation. That can be volunteers, the church council, adult forums, whoever. Who popped into your mind as Rozella was talking and you thought they need to hear this? Please do share this webinar with them. You can also download from the Practice Discipleship site videos and curriculum from last year's theme, which was youth ministry at the crossroads to use in your congregation and networks. Each synod in the ELCA has a practice discipleship coach who has been trained to offer seminars on these webinars locally in your own synod. Training events are posted on that website, and if they're not all there, they will be posted soon. And this is brand new. If you've been listening to my announcements before, you can download the network app for both iPhone and Android. I have it on mine, and I love it. So this free app gives you anytime access to videos, network news, calendar of events, interactive prayer wall, and much more. So if you put a prayer concern on there, people can click and say, I'm praying for you. It's really a great app. Our next webinar is scheduled for March 3rd at 3 p.m. Central. The title is Enculturating the Gospel with Colleen Wyndham Hughes. And just if you're looking at your calendar, these webinars are held approximately every 2 weeks. We do make a small adjustment around Easter, but mostly every 2 weeks. You're also invited to join the next third Tuesday conversation on February 19th at 1 p.m. Central with Dr. Andy Root. His book, Taking Theology to Youth Ministry, is the focus book for this year's Practice Discipleship Initiative. So I do have two more little comments. Tara, thank you. She wrote, I love that transformation releases us for your creativity. Terry wrote, thank you, Rozella and Dawn. You're welcome, Terry. And Erica wrote, this has been so helpful. It has broadened my awareness of how to accompany our community, not just our youth ministry context. So thank you. I'll add my thank you. I'm so glad you could be with us, Rozella.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you very much. And thank you all for the work that you do and the callings that you have answered to be agents of faith formation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, and we will talk to all of you in 2 weeks. Have a great day.